Sick. All right. Welcome back to the Mr. Bill podcast. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I think you've maybe coming close to having the record for being on the most times. This will be our third one, right?
Yeah, it is.
Nice.
Yeah.
I really wanted to have you back this time because I saw you recently did a show in Denver that had like the whole branding of the show was like Marxism basically and socialism, and the entire like economic back end of the show reflected this. You showed me your set intro, and like the whole set intro was like visuals of like communist shit, and your girlfriend dressed in a police uniform doing
It
a
was like a
loud ass
factory.
speech.
She was dressed as like a laborer, like a factory laborer, like in a onesie. She got arrested by two people dressed as cops, but
Right.
yeah. It did kind of. It's the same. She was wearing a blue uniform, I guess.
Looked like a cop, but
Yeah.
but yeah. Anyway, I just saw there was a lot of conversation surrounding it on Twitter, and I have some ideas about this, and I'm curious to hear your ideas about this too. But yeah, where do we begin? I guess maybe you can tell people like about the show first, and then maybe how you got to that point.
Yeah. So, I mean, I always have been kind of like left leaning, but I think within the last few years, I kind of got more radicalized and went a little bit further left. I think up until the last few years, I was probably just like most Americans from like a foundational philosophical point of view. Like I was a liberal, which I think a lot of people who identify as conservatives are probably also liberals. Like in the sense that, the whole like live and let live sort of ethos, as well as, acknowledging private property rights, freedom of speech, and so on. But I think that like liberals are often characterized to me as there's a good quote I think that puts it into perspective, and then I'll move on and actually try and talk about the show and not get too sidetracked. But liberals are against all previous wars except this current one, and are in favor of all previous civil rights movements except for this current one. I think liberals are characterized by thinking that we're sort of like at the end of history, that like we're the most progressed a society can be, and like as civilized as a society can be, and that there's no real need to change it. But with this show, I knew once I started kind of going down these leftist rabbit holes that I wanted to like use my platform to like sort of spread some of these ideas, but I didn't know how to go about that. And when I was pitched the offer to headline Cervantes, I knew that I needed to try and just do something. And in a lot of ways, I was really just winging it because I'd never done anything like that before. And in the grand scheme of things, I'm still relatively early on into like my research and studies on history and leftist history and theory in general. So for that event, I thought that democratizing the pay could be a decent place to start, if not to sort of demonstrate like a preferred way of doing things, as though I think that this is like the correct or the only just way of like doing business or something like that. Like I don't claim to have the answers, although I desperately would like help in searching for them from as many people as possible, really, because change certainly doesn't happen on the individual level, like societal change. At least, like that's my stance on it. Like if people feel powerless, or if people feel powerless, or a sense of futility, in regards to their ability as individuals to change society or the world by themselves, then I think that they'd be correct in that assumption, because I think that the only way that change happens is through like collective action and like organizing. So I was mostly looking to start a wider conversation around these things, and then also provide resources with people. And I didn't want to wait until I felt like I had all the answers, because if I did, it probably could have been years before it happened, or I might have never done anything like it. So it's kind of similar to just like releasing music, where it's like kind of have to just like get over the perfectionist part sometimes, and just like, just put it out and move on. And
yeah, there's a good saying. It's don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Maybe you can explain the show for people who are unaware of what that was, and then we can talk about that for a bit.
Yeah, so just to kind of summarize it in as few words as possible, for this show, the idea that I had was to democratize the pay, where there were 9 of us involved. It ended up being 8 because Omnis, his dad was sick, and he dropped out of the show so that he could be with his dad. But there were 9 of us. There were 6 DJs, 2 VJs, and 1 photographer. And participation was totally voluntary. If people just wanted to get paid their standard rate or whatever, and didn't want to be a part of like a democratic process or an alternative way of doing business, then they were totally welcome to do that. Thankfully, everybody was more than happy to take part in it. And the way that we went about it was we basically took the total budget that we had to distribute between all of us, which typically would have been, like for me in that case, I think, and I didn't post this on the post that I had made. I didn't include this information. Maybe it would have helped, but my initial offer was basically, of the budget that we ended up voting on, I was to get around 50% of it, and then the remaining 50% would have been split across the remaining 8 people. But yeah, we ended up, each person received the total budget number, and from that number, each person allocated how they thought that how much they themselves should get paid, as well as the other 8 people involved. So, each person basically voted 9 different numbers, and that total amount of those 9 different numbers should amount to the total budget. And then, so we had 9 different numbers total or 9 different sets of numbers from 9 different people. So that means that for me, there were 8 different numbers plus the number that I had voted for myself. And then so for me, we took all 8 of those numbers plus the one I voted for myself, and then divided it by 9, which is the total number of people participating.
Right, to get the average.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much how we went about it.
Okay, and yeah, I noticed in your manifesto that you wrote, you did 1 round of this, and the photographer thought that he wasn't getting paid enough, and so you had to do it again. Is that correct?
So, yeah, I amended it, and I just took a little off the top from me. I think that there might have been like a $5 adjustment from like restraint or something, but I think besides that, I was the only person that I took from to give Ethan, the photographer, a little bit more money, because he made some really good points. And there were a few naysayers on Facebook that I won't name, although I'm just going to pretend like they were in good faith, which I don't actually know if that is the case. But somebody said, basically, newsflash, buddy, there's a reason why someone like the photographer was valued the way they were, and it's because people deserve more, depending on their merit or like their level of expertise. It was something to that extent, and I agree with that. I totally agree with that. But I think that this person, what they were saying, kind of like failed to consider one of the other reasons why the photographer might have been undervalued. And I think it really boils down to a matter of like education and people like not necessarily considering or even really thinking much about the labor value of their peers when compared to themselves and other artists and professionals in the industry. So,
But the thing is,
yeah.
in electronic music or in the entertainment industry in general, it's not necessarily the labor value that creates the value. It's how many tickets you can sell. And two artists can do the exact amount of labor. Like, for example, me and Ganja White Knight have been writing music for about the same amount of years. We spend probably the same amount of time in the studio. I might even spend more time in the studio. We've played probably just as many shows as each other. We've basically put in as much labor as each other. But if I go to play a show in Denver, I can sell maybe 1,000 tickets and they can sell 30,000 tickets. And therefore, the labor didn't necessarily convert to the same amount of money in both cases. Like their one converted into millions of dollars and my one converted into, thousands of dollars. And in that case, I think there's a case to be made that if I were to open for Ganja White Knight or something like that, that it shouldn't necessarily be democratized because it's just not the way that the economy of ticket sales work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really valid point in that the way that things are currently, I think makes a lot of the ideas in this show seem to not make sense because in a lot of ways they don't without some larger societal, cultural, and particularly economic shifts in order to make that stuff conducive in the first place. Because, I certainly don't think that we live in a meritocracy. Obviously, it doesn't really, especially in the arts, in many industries, there isn't necessarily a correlation with how hard you work and or how talented you are or how many hours you put in or how good of a person you are. None of those things seem to correlate with no one of those things seems to correlate on a 1-to-1 ratio with making a lot of money or even bringing in a lot of ticket sales. So that's something that I would like to see change, but I certainly don't think that it would change just,
Well, to have that change, it would mean that the fans of the music, fans are going to like what they're going to like, right? If you hear a song, you're going to like it or you're not going to like it. And there's a spectrum of how much you'll like it. And on one end of that spectrum, you'll be like, that sucks, I never want to hear it again. In the middle of that spectrum, you'll be like, oh, it was okay. And then on one end of this, on the other far end of it, you'll be like, that was amazing. And I want to buy this person's merch and I want to go to their shows and this made me feel something and all of this kind of shit. And I think that is just an incredibly vague process as to why music does one or the other to different people in different ways. And some people just somehow manage to find the perfect combination of the sound plus being able to present the sound in such a way that people are able to connect with it and identify with it and stuff like that. And I feel like that's just because we can't measure that. To me, it seems so futile to try to democratize art and pay everybody the same for it. I wish that it was that way. But without being able to essentially extract how much value people are getting as a tangible number from any given music or any given piece of music or any given show, it just seems so impossible to do. What I would think would have to be the case for that to be true is, everybody would have to have a Neuralink in their brain and you would have to be able to measure the amount of dopamine and serotonin as tangible numbers that you can read and then show everyone music and then measure the amount of like value that everybody is getting from it, maybe average out that value. So it's like for every artist that plays that night, maybe the opener got a value of 10,000 dopamines and 10,000 serotonins, and maybe the headliner only got like 800. So therefore but yeah, because we can't measure that, it seems so hard to democratize. And so we have to go off basically the only tangible number that we have, which is ticket sales.
Yeah, no. One of the other issues, I think that the largest issue that encompasses everything else is economics and like our economic structure in the Western world. But second to that are cultural elements and how we think and feel about ourselves and each other. And one of those things that that rubs me the wrong way in many cases is hierarchies, where I certainly don't think, and I don't think that any socialist would think this as well. It's certainly not the socialist, Marxist, or communist position that like everybody should be paid the same, and that's like a common misconception. I'm not at all saying that that's what you're saying, but I know that that's what a lot of people think. But like I know anarchists, at least I think that anarchists believe that the only valid hierarchy, and we might have touched on this last time actually, but the only valid hierarchy is one of expertise. So like parent-child or surgeon-patient or something like that. So I think that, when it comes to doing something like democratizing the pay of something, one, obviously you could only ever even have a shot at doing this with like people that you trust or consider your friends. Because if you were to just do this with random schmucks, just like, kind of from like a naive point of view and like assuming the best out of everybody, you could very well
off constantly.
Yeah, you could very well end up in a situation where like, if there's 9 people voting and there's a budget of $10,000, you could easily have like one person just vote 10,000 for themselves, and then the other 8 people just get 0. But if you're working with friends, obviously, then that's not really an issue. And I think in that case, most people are reasonable, I think. And if they think, if most people think and believe that one artist deserves more recognition, more money, etc., because they believe that this artist has put in more work, has been around longer, has more expertise, so on and so forth, then that's going to reflect in what they vote. And I think that that's what happened in this process too. I think that, let me pull up.
But isn't that already reflected in people streaming an artist's music more or buying tickets to a person's show more? Like they're essentially already like in a way voting by showing their fandom by buying a ticket or streaming a song. Isn't it almost similar?
Yeah, except I guess there's a couple counters to that come to mind. One, I think there's nothing in regards to artists that are already selling out venues like Red Rocks or something. There's really no argument to be made. If an artist is selling out Red Rocks, nobody could really say that they aren't selling out Red Rocks or that they don't bring in that many ticket sales. But where I'm coming from and what I think about often is sort of like the motion of power and like power relations and power dynamics between people and institutions, whether it's like just in individual relationships or whether it's like on a societal level. So when I think of really, really big artists that can sell out a venue like Red Rocks, just as like an arbitrary example, if these artists have been sort of leaning into hierarchies in the sense that they're, build significantly higher and larger than everybody else on the lineup. In instances where they're billed significantly higher where other artists over other artists on the lineup and get paid significantly more than other artists on the lineup, I think that that sort of thing accumulates and like snowballs over a period of time where, like, if we're just starting out, like if you have artist A and artist B that are at the same level, they're sort of viewed in their communities as being on par with one another. But then you have one promoter who sees something more in artist A than in artist B, or maybe promoter is friends with artist A and not artist B. So promoter bills artist A above artist B and pays artist A significantly more than artist B. In these situations, it's kind of almost, I don't know if innocuous is the right word. It's let me see the definition just to make sure. Innocuous, not yet. It's almost innocuous in that it's it's a process that I think that no one person is necessarily like responsible for or like even conscious of, I think, most of the time. But then in the second show, I think that the perception of artist A and artist B in that example is going to be warped from then on moving forward. So now artist A just has a higher likelihood of being billed higher than artist B at basically any point in the future, especially if it happens again. And then that compounds over and over and over. And then especially in instances where artist A does nothing to sort of mitigate that, or at least like put in a word for this person that they call their friend, artist B, then artist B could just basically be in a position where they're lagging behind in a way that, one could describe it as unjust or unfair, but it's also just, in a way, it's like very arbitrary, and it clearly has nothing to do with merit in this like example. But artist A in this example, and whether there's, from these small 100, 200 cap venues all the way up to Red Rocks, assuming that's the trajectory that artist A has, every step of the way, assuming that they're leaning into hierarchies and sort of capitalizing and exploiting off of the fact that, they can be billed higher, they can be perceived as bigger by people in the community, and they get paid more. They're accumulating with each show, each step of the way, they're accumulating more social capital and more money. And both of those things sort of feed into each other in like a positive feedback loop. So, like in other words, like an artist selling out Red Rocks, I'm not arguing whether or not that like that, an artist that sells a fuck ton of tickets has, the pull that they do or anything like that. But what I might argue is sort of how valid their position where they're at is in the first place, depending on exactly how they got there.
Yeah, I mean, I think to get to that level of selling out Red Rocks, you need a lot more than just having higher billing on a show once or twice. And like you said, it might compound over time. And that is part of it. But I think there's so much more to getting to that size. You need, like, to get to that point of like selling out Red Rocks, you need to have so many things on lock. Like, you need to have a crazy good team. You need to have really good social media. Your music has to be really good. You need a really good agent who's like assertive and working really hard for you. You need some sort of personality that people can connect with and identify with. You need to be a good DJ. You need to be playing really good sets. You need to have the right branding. You need to make sure that your visuals at the shows reflect that branding. You need to like have emojis that you use in your posts and shit, like just small detail shit like that. You need a little bit of luck as well. you need to be releasing the right music at the right time. And then on top of that, yes, you need to be pushing for like slightly better billing on festivals and stuff like that as well. I think if you can like have all of those things on lock, and maybe another thing is like community as well, like having a solid community that you can engage to the point where they become rabid through things like Patreon, Discord, social media, stuff like that. I think it's like Facebook groups. I think it's a combination of a lot of things, and you need to be like pushing really hard on all fronts. You need to have a good team to help you push hard on all fronts. And then on top of that, yes, you need to be pushing for billing size as well, and you need to have an agent that's able to do that for you. And pretty much every like superstar success case I've seen, either from looking in from the outside and doing a little bit of like my own case studies online, or from knowing them personally and talking to them, they all work like insanely hard, like harder than a normal DJ that I know who's not that size for the most part. It's like usually when I see somebody at that level, I pretty quickly understand why they're at that level. It's because they're just like obsessive about all of these things. And while I would argue that there is cases where somebody has been sort of nepotistically put in those positions, I think for the most part, what I see personally is not that. It's somebody who's just worked extremely hard and just is really switched on and knows what they need to be doing to get to that point.
No, I agree for the most part. And especially in regards to the fact that there's so much that goes into it, and that an artist selling out a venue like Red Rocks probably does work significantly harder than someone who might not be, or someone who's struggling to sell out venues. I think that that's probably fair to suggest in a lot of cases. There's something else that you said, and I'm trying to.
There is. I will say though, there is definitely like a crazy amount of psychology that happened, like with billing size. If somebody like all of a sudden just has a bigger name on a flyer, for some reason that does seem to have like some mass psychological effect on fans, where they're like, oh, so that artist is that size now. Okay, great, good. And then everyone kind of just like agrees with that, and then they kind of get that social position. And dude, I've been on some threads before, like some management agent threads, and I've seen conversations go on for like fucking 2 days, like 50, 60 emails about billing size, like people wanting their name to be 10 pixels bigger than somebody else's name, and people wanting their name to be to the left of someone instead of the right of someone, or wanting special guest billing so that it can be like sort of separated from the rest of the cattle down the bottom, or like whatever. And that shit, I mean, I've noticed a lot of festivals these days have just been like, fuck that, we're not having those conversations anymore, it's a waste of time, and they just do everything alphabetically, and sometimes by tier, but still alphabetically by tier. And I think that that's a good move. Honestly, I think it's better than the arguments for 4 or 5 days over bullshit.
Yeah, I think that that's probably like one of the best sort of like band-aids currently, like under our current conditions, like and under our current economic structure, under our current sort of cultural norms and expectations. I think that like ABC billing is probably like one of the best things that we could do. With all that being said, another thing
change my
that
name to A Mr. Bill.
Yeah. A just 15 A's.
001 A Mr.
Bill. Yeah. Another thing, a lot of this stuff, I think a lot of like the most severe disagreements that people have sort of boil down to chicken or egg, basically. And there's one thing that I wanted to like touch on also, and like I'll maybe try and tie it into what I'm about to say shortly after, or maybe later into the conversation, because like a lot of this stuff is like very abstract, and sort of coming up with like examples is like really helpful. I like to provide as many as possible, but like our culture in the Western world and the United States is very idealistic, and in Eastern cultures, it's more materialistic. Not to sort of like oversimplify or like be reductive about it, but like basically what it boils down to is that idealists think that our ideas are sort of independent from our environment and sort of come from somewhere divine, whereas materialists see that our brain is also made of matter, so that the thoughts that come from it must too also be follow the same laws as the material world around us. So in other words, materialists sort of, if this is a chicken or the egg thing, materialists think that our environments have the ultimate say as to the type of thoughts that enter into our brains in the first place, whereas an idealist might think that you can just sort of overcome your environment. And like, I think that in more quote unquote civilized societies, that like obviously something like idealism, like, you know, manifesting, for example, I think idealist philosophies seem very prevalent throughout quote unquote civilized society in the Western world, because the conditions are kind of conducive to, for many people, at least in the Western world, conducive to being able to sort of think of something and then, you know, following through with it and then having it sort of come to fruition. But obviously, like talking to somebody in the Congo or on Skid Row or in Gaza and, you know, telling them to just like manifest or pull themselves up by their bootstraps, like obviously seems like insane. But I wanted to just like touch on that really quick before just bringing up another example, and then I'll see if I can tie it back to idealism or materialism after the fact. But one thing I think about, and the psychology I think is definitely like relevant here too. When you have, and there's plenty of examples of this, but when you have like artist A that's really popular and really well known, but maybe isn't all that groundbreaking and isn't really pushing the envelope, or doing anything particularly notable apart from selling a lot of tickets and being well known and putting on a good show, I guess. And then artist B, where in this example I'm thinking of, and I would like to avoid like, you know, saying any specific names, but you have this dynamic that's very common, where you have artist A that's very popular and then maybe isn't really a producer's producer, to put it that way, and then artist B that, you know, sort of lagged behind, but is like has more of a cult following, and is like widely respected by many people in the industry, especially like creatives and artists and producers and stuff like that, but is significantly less popular and then therefore like sells a lot less tickets. So there's the one way of looking at it, if we are going to do a chicken and egg kind of situation here, where it's, I guess, very easy to just sort of look at a situation like that and go, okay, well, artist A did, you know, checked all the boxes and did whatever they needed to do to get into that position. And artist B maybe just like needed to do those things as well. But what I wonder, and I'm not going to argue that it's entirely this case, but what I often think about is like the psychology, even just in the dynamic between these two hypothetical people, where like if I'm really good friends with somebody, and we came up together, we're both making music, we're both neck and neck, and then they start getting more popular, faster. Maybe they're more comfortable doing certain things like playing the game, quote unquote, and doing all the things that help one be successful in the society that we currently live in. A lot of those things, and I'm sure that you can attest to this, like there's plenty of things that like kind of just feel icky. And I think that a lot of it boils down to just like how we think about it. Like, oh, like, I don't know if I want to post a reel or something. Like, what am I, some fucking asshole? Like, I've had those thoughts in my head in the past, like as if, I'm just like a dancing monkey, like, commodifying myself, which, I also think is true to an extent as well. But like, I think that if I want to survive in this society and also like thrive, then there's like certain things that I need to get over. And there's a wide spectrum of like morality and ethics in terms of like the things that we can do to be successful, make a lot of money, get really popular. And not all of them are like morally reprehensible. I think that there's obviously plenty of the choices that we have at our disposal. Many of which are also just perfectly legal as well. Like there's also not necessarily a correlation between like what's, moral and what's legal or whatever. But a lot of what it takes to make it, I think, requires like first feeling comfortable with those things. And in this dynamic that I'm referring to, like if artist B maybe doesn't feel comfortable with those things, with doing a lot of those things, and just doesn't, maybe artist B just isn't as interested in I guess playing the game, to oversimplify it. I wonder if like in a lot of these situations, if like, I just wonder if like the psychological impact, I guess, on like artist B, and like their perception on the industry, on the world, on friendship, relationships, what those things mean, when they see one of their friends or peers like skyrocket past them with little to no sort of acknowledgement of like the support received from artist B, whether it was like, support by like word of mouth or helping share posts, or creative influence, or just like literal help in the studio or something like that. Like, literally just being present during like the most important parts of that process. I just feel like, I don't know. I haven't rehearsed this thought before. So it was definitely way more words than I would have liked for it to have been. And I still don't even know how clear it was, but I think that it just bums me out sometimes. Like, for example, Restraint, who was like, I guess, direct support for me at the Cervantes show. He's like one of the biggest brain producers on the earth. It's probably fair to say that he's like one of the best producers on the earth. Like, we could say that about like a lot of our peers and friends, in our little like subgenre of electronic music. But like, what I wonder if like, I could just as easily say that like, the reason that he has not made it like more successful than he is or something, or is more popular than he is because he doesn't play the game, which is absolutely true. He doesn't really play the game. But I also just wonder, like, if that dude's gotten snubbed in the past, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody like him might have like asked themselves, like, what's even the point? Like, why would I even try if there are people who don't care nearly as much about X, Y, and Z thing, whether it's a matter of like morality and ethics, or it's a matter of like artistic integrity or something like that. And I don't know, I have a soft spot for those kind of slept on big brain producers that do have a lot of integrity, but maybe just like don't want to play the game.
But also, like, you're a producer. And so to you, something that is impressive is somebody being an amazing producer. Whereas I think most people, like, the value in the entertainment industry is entertainment. That's what people want from you, basically, is they want to be entertained. So when you feel like, oh, maybe I'm just a monkey posting a reel or whatever, that is the case, actually. It's like, that's exactly what you're doing. You're like a jester. You're posting it for entertainment. And that's why people are going to keep watching your shit, because it entertains them. And that's why they're going to maybe give you money in the future, because they want to go have a good time and be entertained. I also think that, sometimes I think it can be easy to gaslight yourself. Like, if something, like, I've seen a few artists get massive and I'm just like, I don't understand why. Like, the music to me doesn't make any sense. And I'll often gaslight myself into being like, well, maybe I just don't know what's actually sick. Like, maybe my views on music is just super bent out of shape because I'm too myopically focused on production. And so the things that I'm looking at maybe aren't actually that important, and maybe what people actually like is this more simplistic thing, and maybe the whether or not the snares sound good or not doesn't really affect 99% of people's view on the music. And I think there is probably some truth to that. But I also think that, like, people just want somebody that A, entertains them, and B, that they can identify with. I think a lot of people I see get big. They get big because they put so much of themselves online, and other people are like, I agree with that. I identify with that. Like, this person reminds me of me, and therefore, like, I feel comfortable, like, listening to them and following them and stuff like that. And I feel like if you never put anything online except for your music, and on top of that, your music is specifically geared towards other producers, like, the aspect of your music that's actually interesting is really only interesting to producers, and the musicality of it is really, like, not going to connect with most people, because to most people, like, you know, if I listen to a sound design tune, but it's mostly noise and stuff like that, I usually don't connect with it that much. The stuff that I keep going back to over and over again over the years that I really connect with is music, you know, like stuff that's got really sick melodies, stuff that's got like a nice vibe to it, or a vocal that I really like or something. To me, I also like it when the production is really nice, but if I had to pick one or the other, I think most of the time, I mean, luckily I never have to pick one or the other. I can usually pick something that sounds good and is musically interesting. But I think the music side of it is more important. And a lot of producers, I think that gets sort of lost on them because they're so, like, deep in the rabbit hole of making neuro basses and perfecting their snares that that it might get a little, the soul and the whole, like, vibe of why people mostly listen to music, not everybody, just kind of gets lost a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, like, I think, like, with that being said, I think, like, you know, you could argue that there's plenty of artists, plenty of these, like, sort of big brain perfectionist artists that we're sort of, like, describing here that might have, like, an idealist perspective as to, like, how they think art should be, or how they think art should be consumed, or
Well, I
something like
think
that.
every artist has that, I think, to some degree.
Yeah, no, for sure.
It's like the whole
And
reason you get into it, right? It's because you're like, I can do this. I can make an ideal version of this.
yeah, exactly. And I think that that's not to say that, like, you know, so, like, capitalism, I would say, is idealist, because, I mean, it is. Adam Smith, who, the Scottish dude who basically, like, wrote the book on capitalism in, like, the early 1800s, I think, um, he had a lot of sort of ideals as to, like, how it would play out, and, like, one of which is that, you know, individuals all selfishly pursuing their own interests would eventually lead to a better world, and, like, the surplus value that these individual entrepreneurs and such would produce would eventually benefit the collective. And I think that you could say that that has happened, but I don't think that it happens in the way that maybe Adam Smith probably, like, idealized it to, where, like, I think when it does happen, there's a significant lag, I think, where, like, it probably took about 10 to 15 years for, like, for example, people in developing countries in the third world, to start having smartphones when compared to when smartphones, were sort of more mainstream in the Western world. So with all that being said, I think within the context of our current economic structure, I think that any alternative idea or suggestion in terms of an alternative way of economics or an alternative way of going about really any one aspect or any one business approach under our current economic structure, one could argue that it is idealist to think that any of these, any alternative solution or band-aid under our current system would really work at all. So like maybe, I guess what I'm getting at is like an artist that might have some sort of idealized vision of how they think that art should be made and consumed or whatever. It might just be fully fucking idealist, like no matter how you cut it. But I think that there are plenty of instances where it might be a materialist perspective given the right conditions, but we just don't have them currently. So like, under the right conditions, especially like if there were not like profit incentives, I think like first and foremost, and if there were sort of like more horizontal structures or systems in place to sort of prevent or reduce or limit the amount of power that like any one individual or institution or company or corporation can amass by themselves. I think that under the right conditions that a lot of otherwise like seemingly idealist perspectives might actually be more materialist in that, and when I say materialist in this sort of context, I kind of mean it like in the sense that it's like more in line with what makes sense, what's feasible, maybe more in line with nature, where I'm kind of coming from about a lot of these things. And like one like simple word that has like really inspired me a lot, and it's like an entire field of study that some people have like doctorates in and dedicate their whole lives to, is ecology. So like how organisms influence their environment and how environments influence organisms. So like I think a more materialist perspective would be one that sort of considers ecological factors, whether it's like in a literal sense, like in terms of like how us humans interface with our environments and how we influence our environments and how our environments influence us, or in an economic sense, where like, how we as individuals are sort of shaped economically, how the choices that we make are influenced by our current economic situation and the environment that we're lived in, and how the economy.
Totally, yeah. It's definitely hard to fully envision what a socialist society will look like because pretty much all of our preconceived notions are capitalistic ones. But maybe could you describe, like, I don't know, envision some world and describe where, say, Artist B in your previous example, the one that makes amazing music but maybe doesn't want to play the posting reels game and is not selling as much tickets as Artist A, who's kind of meh, but for some reason they sell a lot of tickets. Like, what would be an example, or like how would you envision in a socialist economy Artist B getting to the size of Artist A?
Well, yeah, like without a profit incentive and in some,
because also without a profit incentive, you wouldn't even have things like Spotify, right? Like the ability to even get your music out to millions of people may not even be there, because I mean, pretty much the whole reason Spotify exists is so that they can make money.
Well, yeah, like Spotify absolutely exists to make money. But in some like hypothetical utopian future where there's no profit incentive and where everybody's like most basic fundamental needs are met, and we have infrastructure that provides like support or assistance where it's needed, to, based on like certain individuals' unique needs and things like that. I would imagine that, first of all, lineups would probably be more interesting because they wouldn't really be beholden to profits or ticket sales and things like that.
But how would I guess like how would that? So you're saying everybody just gets given basically an equal amount of money, so everybody's shit is just taken care of, and then events really only happen because people specifically want them to, and then everybody volunteers to come and play the event. Is that basically how that would work?
Yeah, I imagine that events would sort of spring up in a way that's kind of like autonomous and decentralized, and probably also more local, because I think that like if we were to live more in line with, say, nature, and like be kind of more harmonious with nature and minimize waste and maximize efficiency from an ecological standpoint, then like I think unless that we had infrastructure for better public transportation, and particularly things like high-speed rails or something like that, that we would probably see things be more communal and less flying around the country or something like that. But if there were high-speed trains and stuff, then I imagine that we could still absolutely have like people doing like nationwide tours and touring even like other countries and stuff like that too.
I would say the communal aspect of it would actually, you could make an argument that the events would be less interesting. Because then you would just get like everybody from like one area is going to basically end up sounding quite homogenous. I think one of the things that makes festivals so interesting these days is that you can get, some people from France, some people from the UK, some people from America, some people from the West Coast, the East Coast, and everyone's kind of got their own, peer environmental and then obviously also life influences, which kind of makes for an interesting lineup, I think.
No, definitely. Like, and especially like if society were to collapse tomorrow and then we were to have to rebuild it, that it would probably be decades before there were any like meaningful infrastructure that could like,
like events wouldn't be our first priority. We'd be thinking about
events would not be our first priority whatsoever under like that hypothetical, but it would be at least a decade or more, I imagine, between before we had like the infrastructure that could even like facilitate events that are not sort of more local. But like if we were to look further ahead, and like imagine even further into this like hypothetical kind of utopian future, which I also think is like really important, not to sidestep, but I'm gonna real quick. But like there's a book by this dude, Mark Fisher, RIP. Dude was an absolute legend. He wrote this book called Capitalist Realism, which basically the reason that he titled it Capitalist Realism, is there no alternative, is because whenever he would basically try and have a conversation with anybody about, any potential alternative to capitalism, and he at his peak it seemed like in the mid to late 2000s is when he was like really doing stuff the most, and in like the early 2010s I think is when that book came out. He killed himself I think in like the late 2010s, but what he was noticing is that like whenever he would try and have a conversation about alternatives, that it's almost as if people short circuit, because most people, and this is a quote that's not just from the book, but it's actually from this philosopher Zizek, Slavoj Zizek, I don't know how to say his name, and some other dude was actually credited with saying this, and it was just quoted in the book, but the quote is, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. So I think that it's of the utmost importance, I think, for us to like even like have these conversations and just try our best to imagine something better. And it is funny because in a lot of ways it it sounds idealist under our current framework, because like it's almost as though the economic reality that we currently live in that didn't come out of thin air, that we were more or less born into. It's almost as if most people kind of assume that is reality, or that it's natural or something, and that this was sort of like, I guess, destined. And I think a good like testament to this, how most people literally just can't. It's literally easier for most people to picture the end of the world than like even the first like one or two steps in the direction of thinking of an alternative, is the fact that like there are just countless dystopian novels and movies, and like sort of cyberpunk futures, or kind of Mad Max-esque futures, because I think it's far easier for us to imagine those types of realities, because it's arguably the trajectory that we're already kind of headed on, is like something that's either sort of like some dystopian capitalist world like cyberpunk, or something like Mad Max. But yeah, I am desperate to sort of imagine alternatives, and look to history and find as many examples as possible of, alternative like socialist experiments succeeding, and ones that did poorly, and just have the most fair and honest, arguably scientific approach to consider like every previous revolution, basically since the Industrial Revolution, and especially and specifically like socialist revolutions, and to consider every socialist experiment on like a country level since the Industrial Revolution, and just look at it like fairly and honestly, like as someone like myself who like identifies as a Marxist, and to not sugarcoat any atrocities that more or less happened as a more direct result of something like socialism or communism, to not like sugarcoat that stuff, but to also look to where things went right and where things went wrong, and to consider like the conditions at the time as well.
Yeah, I mean, we also have to look at some of the atrocities that are obviously attributed to capitalism, like pretty much every war. Like if you think about why pretty much every war happens, you can say, yeah, it's because this party hated this other party or whatever, but that's one of the reasons. The probably bigger reason is that somebody had billions of dollars to gain from selling weapons to somebody else. And I actually had somebody on this podcast who sold a shitload of weapons to the Afghans, and we had a big conversation about that. If anyone wants to listen to it, it's the one with David Packows. I guess the thing that I would worry about with socialism is the reduced incentives. Like, I think capitalism sets people up in such a way that you have businesses competing really really hard against each other to try and create a better product, and so they're forced to innovate. They're forced to do things for better prices. They're forced to do it like more efficiently and stuff like that. And as a consumer, that's a good thing. Maybe for the environment, it's not such a good thing, because you end up with consumerism and a lot of waste and all that kind of shit. But yeah, I think what is a good argument against that for pro-socialism?
Yeah. So in regards to the incentives thing, well, for starters, I think that it kind of like sort of assumes that there would still be even a need to be pushing to it's kind of like hold on, let me start over here. It kind of assumes that there would be a need or even a desire to innovate quickly, I guess. Like,
well, not necessarily quickly, but creating the most ideal end product for people. For example, like let's go with Spotify, right? That's like the most ideal way to consume music from a consumer perspective. You just touch a button on your phone, and you can listen to any song you want for free if you're willing to listen to ads. It's immediate. You get updates from artists about new music like every single day. Basically, it's like I couldn't like think of a better way to get music. I mean, I'm sure there is better ways, but compared to like finding and listening to music, 20 years ago, where you had to go to like what.cd and download a torrent and like try and find some shit that way, or you had to go like open an app on your computer, like LimeWire, I guess happened in the early 2000s, and you didn't even know what you were looking for. There was no thing that was there was no algorithm that was designed for you specifically to be like, you'll probably like this, and here's a new thing from this artist that you downloaded a thing from earlier, etc. Like I think that's a great innovation in terms of listening to music. I don't agree with the company at all. I think they're a shitty company, but I think that the product is good. And so I would assume that there's probably a need and a want for that regardless of capitalism or socialism. But I feel like the incentive to build it would maybe be reduced in a socialist society.
I think that there's definitely some truth to that. I don't know enough examples throughout history. I know that there's plenty of people I've seen like on like leftist Twitter who, make arguments saying that like it seems like many of some of the most world-changing inventions, whether it's like the internet or smartphones and like computer chips and the telephone and like there are many examples of these things that are often kind of like accredited to capitalism as being like the reason why they exist. But
well,
like
the
I
internet
know
was originally designed for military, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, exactly. I'm pretty sure.
Which we
that
just
I would.
said was due to capitalism to some degree.
Well, there's often instances where a lot of these products would have or inventions would have never come to be in the first place had it not been for like government subsidies. There's also the argument to be made that like these products only became mainstream in the first place because of the work of the laborers in the factories making these products. Obviously, the world is different now. We're in the digital age. There's at least one person, this dude, Giannis, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he's the former Secretary of Finance or Minister of Finance from Greece, who I think retired or resigned after the financial crisis in Greece, who wrote a book called Techno-Feudalism, who argued, and he's a leftist also, but he argued that contrary to Marx's thesis that capitalism, that socialism and communism are inevitable, and that capitalism will create its own gravediggers, and that, because capitalism has so many inherent contradictions, that it will eventually create the conditions that inevitably lead to socialism and then eventually communism. This dude is arguing that we're already living under what he calls techno-feudalism, where you have these things like these alleged markets like Amazon and Facebook as two examples where like it's the equivalent of if you and I both went to the mall and were window shopping because of algorithms in this like hypothetical mall where we're both looking through the window of a store, you and I would both see completely different products. I don't want to get too veered off track because I want to like answer the question that you had like regarding like incentive though. I think that, yeah, there certainly would be reduced incentive to, in the almost like stereotypical, like, or like a child's version of like what I remember. Like, I think most people's sort of like ideas of like economics are not necessarily that different probably from like when we were kids. And I can kind of attest to this myself. Because like a lot of like learning about a lot of this stuff and just like sort of like looking into these other perspectives and like learning about all these different ideologies and certainly coming to the conclusion that I've been lied to like many other Americans and sort of just like led astray and not really given the opportunity to like think critically. But whenever I'm sort of like reading about a lot of these things and thinking about economics, it's like a lot of the thoughts that I have in my head are really not any more developed from since when I first like learned about a lot of these things. Yeah, as far as the incentives goes, I don't think there wouldn't be an incentive, say, to just like start a business, because we probably wouldn't need businesses the way that we currently understand them and have them now. If we didn't have, financial incentives the way that we have now, or and profit motives the way that we have now, and assuming that people's most basic fundamental needs were met and we had the infrastructure in place, so that people could sort of focus their energies on, doing things for the good of like humanity as opposed to self-interest or anything else, then yeah, I imagine that we wouldn't have nearly as many commodities as we have now. I imagine that we wouldn't have, if society crumbled to the ground tomorrow and it was rebuilt by people who were coming together in a democratic manner to sort of talk about like, okay, what should we prioritize and what should we have in this new world? I imagine that we wouldn't have Coca-Cola and fucking high fructose corn syrup, like sodas, across all of our food environments and every gas station, every grocery store, and every Walmart. We probably wouldn't have junk food the way that we currently understand, as it currently exists now. Most people's food environments in the United States, unless you it's some bougie person who's living in like a well-off area and can afford, nicer food. Most people's food environments in the United States is like pretty shitty. So it's like, yeah, I definitely agree that there would probably be a reduced incentive for frivolous fucking shit overall. Things that I would argue in most cases are probably frivolous, and I would make an argument in favor of degrowth, basically just slowing the fuck down. Mark Twain coined the term the Gilded Age, which I think was like 1870 to like 1900. And it was an era characterized by rampant, cutthroat growth and hyper competitiveness as people settled into their as colonizers settled like out in the West and made a name for themselves and took land for themselves and did everything they could to come up with like ways of like making money basically and playing the game. But back then, it was way harder to sort of from like a government standpoint to regulate any of these things or to even like enforce it. Cause like I can only imagine, like Morgan and I, my fiance Morgan, for anyone listening, just went to Colorado Springs and we went to some like ghost town museum. And I was just like thinking as we were like walking through this area, like it had basically like they took like literal like rooms from these like ghost towns, like abandoned mining towns from like around the Colorado Springs area. Like they just like took entire rooms in some cases, like they took the wood from the walls and the ceiling and they took like a lot of the furniture from inside them and then just like put it inside this building. So it's almost just like an aggregate of like all these different settings, whether it's like a barber shop or like a bar or a jail cell or something. And I was just thinking like how silly police must have seemed in like the Wild West, because like you basically have colonizers, like early US settlers, and like at this point in like 1870s to 1900, like they're already likely descendants of colonizers in many cases, but in plenty of cases too, you had just like straight up like people who were just coming off the boat and they're just trying to, make a name for themselves at whatever cost that might be. And just thinking about how fucking ridiculous the idea of like police telling you that like you can't do something is around that time, because it's like, who are you to say like, if because it's almost like I think down to most people's core, especially around this time, people probably kind of acknowledged that like nobody really had any right to do any of that shit. So why would a police officer have any right to like tell you or anybody that like you can't run a business this way, you can't steal, or you can't take this land, or you can't do this or that. But the Gilded Age was, characterized by cutthroat competitiveness and a lack of safety, a lack of consideration for safety in general, and the conditions of workers that were working under these. What's the word I'm looking for? I guess entrepreneurs and like wealthy colonial aristocrats and moguls were often very shitty as well. So I think that there's absolutely an argument to be made in favor of degrowth and like maybe just slowing things down a little so that we can consider things like safety and the environment and the conditions of the people that are helping us achieve our goals. It's not.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that we're not doing the best things that we possibly can for the environment right now, and due to capitalism, there definitely is a lot of shitty things happening. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, and I think that's just an example of a contradiction under capitalism, where like I think that the environment suffering, safety kind of always coming second, is sort of just like a contradiction or a consequence of the profit motive. I think when people's survival is so intertwined with, making money and profit seeking, then it's a fair conclusion to come to arrive at that. Things like safety are going to probably come second, as well as the environment. And many other things like imperialism, which like Vladimir Lenin said, imperialism is like the highest form of capitalism. He also said that imperialism is capitalism turned outwards, and fascism is capitalism turned inwards on its own people.
For sure. Well, I got to get back to work, but I appreciate you taking the time to have this chat. I found it interesting. And where can people go find you?
Yeah, my website's Keota-tunes.net. You could also just type in Keota.us and it'll redirect to Keota-tunes.net. On there, I got links to really anything important, like my Discord, my Patreon, where you
where people can also read your manifesto as well for the show.
Yep. And I'll honestly probably just like kind of treat like one part of my website like a blog for this sort of thing, because like with each of those manifesto posts, there's been people who have come to me with like many questions and concerns and whatever. And if I were to like properly address all of those questions and concerns and any like naysayers or people who are just sort of like wondering like how X, Y, and Z thing would work, I would probably just like need to write a fucking book. So yeah, I'll probably just be continuously like writing my thoughts there as I sort of like formulate new ones after, just sort of like as time passes and I think of new things and people come to me with concerns or questions or doubts. But yeah, I really appreciate you having me on. There's a million and one things to say about this. It's a conversation that, could go on for the rest of my life, honestly. And yeah, it's because it's not, it is not at all a simple thing. We're so economically intertwined with people on the other side of the world in ways that like most people like can hardly even conceptualize. So yeah, I'm just trying to sort of like antagonize a little bit and just sort of like stoke the flames a little so that we at least start having these conversations because I feel like I tweeted this the other day. I feel like Sisyphus trying to like learn all this without like any of my close friends or peers also reading and learning in parallel with this stuff. But the more I am vocal about these things, I think I kind of end up serving as like a lighthouse. And then suddenly people come out of the woodwork that I didn't even know about, that I align with. And so if you're into any of this stuff, anybody listening, go to my website, check out my Discord there, hop in there. There's I have like a proletariat chat in there for anybody who's trying to basically conspire and like, butt heads about this stuff. But
yeah, another thing you tweeted recently that I thought was funny is you said somebody at the end of your show yelled out like, "Don't make it political," and you were like, "Have we just become so fucking hedonistic that we just can't even like think about another idea without squirming or whatever?" And I think that's a good point. I think that people should be more accepting of different ideas, and so long as you're not like pushing it down somebody's throat or whatever. I think it's like healthy to be exposed to other ideas, and I think doing it through music's a fair way to do it.
Yeah.
And you're right, like you'll get, I think, a fan base from this, and people connecting with you who you align with. Like you said, you got to be careful about that too. I know you mentioned at the start that you had like a self-awareness about becoming radicalized, and I think the more that you espouse an idea and then get surrounded by people who also have that idea you got to be careful about the radicalization of ideas too. I think this sometimes about myself. I had it with mountain biking, where I got into mountain biking. I was like, this is sick, but this is like so dangerous. I never want to like go down a hill steeper than this because this is really dangerous. And then I followed a bunch of mountain bikers on Instagram, and I was just all day looking at Instagram of people like jumping huge things and like riding down the most gnarly, insane shit. And I noticed that I became more comfortable with doing way more dangerous shit on a mountain bike. And I was like, wait, am I becoming radicalized over mountain biking right now? And I think this happens all the time. I get radicalized constantly, and I think it's inevitable, and it's difficult to avoid if you with the algorithms these days just feeding you a shitload of information that they know that you're going to align with and that you're going to enjoy looking at, ultimately due to capitalism also, right?
Yeah, like I'm totally down to have these conversations with people who like fundamentally disagree, so long as they're willing to have the conversations in good faith. The only time I'm going to block somebody or something is like for my own peace and mental health, but also if like there's clearly nothing productive to come out of a conversation with, that type of person. But like I'm eager to have conversations like this with people especially with people who disagree. But in terms of like my Discord or something, that's kind of more of a community that's meant for like not only people who like more or less align like ideologically, but also like I think that in terms of imagining a better future, that's I guess why I want to serve as a lighthouse, because like I don't know that I don't think I could do it by myself. I don't think any one person could do it by themselves. So like the collective efforts of a bunch of people's imagination, like the community aspect and like my Discord, from my perspective, for me, would be more sort of meant for imagining a better, different future, an alternative future to what we currently have, and conversations with people who fundamentally disagree would be more so for sort of sharpening the blade in terms of like making sure that I am not going to get caught off guard by some argument or angle that I had never considered yet, but also to serve as an opportunity to check myself and just make sure that like I'm not being a tanky, which a tanky is like a Marxist or a communist who will defend any and all of it. They'll defend like the worst atrocities. They'll and it's the classic like that didn't happen, and if it did, they deserved it, kind of a thing. And like, yeah, I would only even want to call myself a Marxist if it meant using critical thinking and analyzing events throughout history in a way that is like fair and considers what went right and what went wrong and the conditions at the time.
And to be
that's
clear,
what,
by the way,
yeah.
I don't necessarily disagree. I have my doubts that it would, ideas like this would scale up to, Coachella-sized festivals and stuff like that. But I also acknowledge that you're right. Under the current circumstances of capitalism, that kind of thing seems like it needs to exist probably more than it would under circumstances of socialism. So that's kind of where I'm
Yeah.
at with it. And I
No,
find it
yeah.
interesting to talk about regardless.
Yep. Yeah. And yeah, just last thing. Yeah, you're totally right. And this is the main thing I wanted to do with that show was to spark wider conversations, because I don't think that we could fix a lot of the things that I see as problems without having a complete restructuring of our whole fucking society. A lot of the ideas that I have probably would seem and arguably are idealist under our current conditions. So, like, if anything, that show was really just a Trojan horse to talk about these things. Because I don't think that we could possibly fix. Even if in the whole industry, if everybody stopped being competitive in the industry and all the moving parts, whether it's the artists, the promoters, the talent buyers, the agents, the managers, the people who own the land, the people who own these companies, the people who own the sound systems, even in a hypothetical situation where our entire industry started working in a collaborative way and not a competitive one, we would still be vulnerable to attack or exploitation by other bad actors in other adjacent industries and fields. There's just too many overlapping moving parts where, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate it. One thing you just brought up there that sparks a thought that maybe we can get into next time is I am curious if the competitive nature of music production actually improves the music. I'm sure it does both. Like, on one hand, you get people who are just making, just churning out cookie cutter bangers for the sake of it because they want to, have some financial gain there. But on the other hand, you have these companies like Ableton, Bitwig, Logic, Apple, all these companies very competitively working against each other to innovate the music industry more and create cooler and more interesting and more useful technology. But yeah, man,
Yeah.
thanks for coming on. Oh,
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
want to say a last thought on that as well?
I guess I feel compelled to.
Go for it.
I feel like in my vision of a socialist or communist utopia, and again, I think that imagining utopias is really important. I think we desperately need people imagining utopian futures as opposed to dystopian ones, because then only through that can we sort of be like, okay, wait a minute, I could actually see that working. I think under a utopian sort of socialist future where everybody's needs are met, I would argue that art would probably be more of a meritocracy than it currently is, where, because one aspect that could sort of prohibit somebody from making the best art that they could ever want to make is the fact that they have to sell their labor, assuming they don't already have any capital to generate wealth passively. Then they have to sell their labor. They have to commodify themselves in some way or another. And if, for those types of people who quite literally can't afford to spend more time working on music, those people certainly would be better off under a system where they just literally had more time.
But that's assuming that we had the technology to make music that we have now.
Well, another important note, too, is that Marx thought that capitalism would be crucial in developing productive forces before moving towards something like socialism or communism. So socialism and communism, those ideas are dialectically intertwined with capitalism, and that they wouldn't exist if capitalism didn't already exist. So yeah, you're right. Capitalism got us to where we are now, and from my perspective, I think capitalism probably has exhausted its merit in a lot of ways. But yeah, like we have, capitalism and the laborers, of course, to thank for like basically most of the technologies that we have today. Government subsidies that might have had something to do with some of these inventions coming to fruition in the first place aside. But yeah, like we already have a lot of this stuff now. And yeah, if we were to transition away from it, then there would probably be like a momentary pause or slowing down of productive forces while things get like rearranged and stuff like that. But yeah, our whole framework of wants and needs or our wants and desires rather. Our needs never change, but our supposed wants and desires are basically pushed on us right out the womb in the form of propaganda by way of advertising. So yeah, it would require a completely different, like, foundational framework of like how we see ourselves and each other and what it is that we even think that we want or desire in the first place.
All right, man. Well, thanks for coming on. I'll chat to you next time.
Yeah, hell yeah, dude. Thanks again.